Cheating Karma: How I Exposed My Wife and Destroyed Her Affair Partner. It was the early 2000s, a time of AOL, flip phones, and cheap motel rendezvous, though I didn't know about that last part yet. I thought my life was good. I had a wife, 2 adorable kids, and what seemed like a stable, ordinary existence. But looking back, I realized that things had started falling apart long before I caught on. Betrayal doesn't show up overnight. It seeps in slowly, like water into cracks, until the whole structure is ready to crumble. Welcome to the Payback Vault, where revenge stories come to life. At first, it was small things. My wife started spending more time away from home, taking the kids with her on what she called day trips to her parents' house. They lived about 90 minutes away, so I didn't think much of it at first. My kids loved their grandparents, and honestly, it gave me some quiet time to myself. But when the trips started happening 2 or 3 times a week, I began to wonder. One evening, as my 6-year-old sat at the dinner table doodling on a napkin, I asked her what Sheba's and her little brother had done that day. "We went to Grandma's house again," she said, with the kind of excitement only a child can muster. I nodded, but something didn't feel right. "Again?" I asked casually. "That's a lot of driving. Did Mommy seem tired?" My daughter shrugged. "No, we didn't go in the morning. We went later after lunch." Something about the way she said it stuck with me. Why was my wife driving all the way to her parents' house after lunch instead of earlier in the day? And why had she never mentioned these trips starting later? The cracks in her story were tiny, but they were there. A growing unease. The more I thought about it, the more uneasy I became. My wife was always vague about these trips. Her explanations were generic. "Oh, the kids just wanted to see their grandparents," or "Mom needed a little help with some house stuff." Sure, those made sense on the surface, but I started noticing how nervous she seemed when I asked for details. One night, after she'd put the kids to bed, I decided to ask her directly. "You've been going to your parents a lot lately," I said, keeping my tone light. "Is everything okay with them?" She froze for just a second, just long enough to set off alarm bells in my head. Then she smiled, a little too wide. "Yeah, of course. You know how they love seeing the kids." I nodded, pretending to accept her answer, but my gut told me there was more to the story. I decided to keep an eye on things. The next morning, as she backed out of the driveway with the kids in tow, I glanced at the odometer on her car. I didn't think much of it at the time, but when she came home that evening, I checked it again. She'd put almost 200 miles on the car in one day. Now, I'm not a math genius, but I know how to add up a round trip to her parents' house. 90 minutes each way should have been about 150 miles, tops. So where did the extra 50 miles come from? The sticky note. At first, I tried to ignore my suspicions. Maybe she'd taken a detour. Maybe she'd forgotten something and had to backtrack. There were a million innocent explanations, but my gut wouldn't let it go. The final straw came one evening when I sat down at the computer to check some work emails. There, stuck to the side of the monitor, was a yellow sticky note with her handwriting on it. AOL password. I stared at it for what felt like forever. I knew it was wrong, unethical even, but my curiosity was too strong. If there was nothing to hide, then I wouldn't find anything, right? That's how I justified it to myself. My hands shook as I typed in her username and password. The inbox loaded, and for a moment, I hesitated. I felt like I was crossing a line I couldn't uncross. But then I saw the first email, and all hesitation evaporated. The emails. Her most recent email was to her college best friend, a woman I'd met once or twice, but didn't know well. The subject line read, "Lunch was amazing." My stomach twisted as I clicked it. The email was short, but damning. "OMG, lunch was so good today. Bob is as handsome as ever, and he still knows how to make me laugh. I'm so glad we had time before picking up the kids. I swear, the way he looks at me makes me feel like I'm 18 again." Bob? Who the hell was Bob? I scrolled through more emails, all of them written to the same friend. They painted a picture I couldn't ignore. Bob was her high school boyfriend, and they'd reconnected somehow. Every email was about how sneaky they'd been, how they managed to steal time together, and the worst part? She mentioned taking the kids to her parents' house like it was just part of her routine now. There was no explicit mention of a motel or anything physical, but I didn't need details to know what was happening. A call for help. The next day, after she left for another day trip, I called a friend of mine who worked as a cop. I told him everything, and he suggested I hire a private investigator. That's how I met Ron, a former detective turned PI who specialized in cases like mine. Ron was a no-nonsense kind of guy. I handed over everything I had, the emails, the mileage logs, even a description of Bob based on my wife's old high school yearbook. "I'll get you what you need," he said. 2 weeks later, Ron handed me a manila folder stuffed with photos, notes, and printouts. My wife hadn't just been seeing Bob, she'd been meeting him regularly for lunch, then driving to a rundown motel on the edge of town. The fallout and revenge. Ron's report was thorough. He documented everything, timestamps, locations, and photos that left no room for doubt. One picture showed her laughing over lunch with Bob, her hand casually resting on his. Another, taken outside the motel, captured the two of them embracing before heading inside. By the time I finished reading through it all, I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. I didn't just want out of my marriage. I wanted to make sure the fallout from her betrayal hit where it hurt the most. Setting the trap. I hired a divorce lawyer the very next day. My childhood had been shaped by the screaming matches and drama that came with my parents' infidelities, and I wasn't about to let my kids go through the same chaos. This divorce was going to be clean, efficient, and on my terms. The first step, serving her the papers. I didn't want to confront her at home where the kids might overhear. Instead, I arranged for her to be served at work. That way, she wouldn't be able to scream, cry, or manipulate the situation. It would be public, embarrassing, and unmissable. And then there was Bob. I wasn't about to let him walk away unscathed. Ron had dug up everything I needed to know about him. He was married, with 3 kids, and worked as the VP of sales for his father-in-law's business. On paper, he seemed like the perfect family man. But underneath that facade, he was just as much of a liar as my wife. I decided Bob's wife deserved to know the truth. So, on the same day my wife was served at work, Ron paid a visit to Bob's home. He handed her a copy of the report, complete with photos and detailed notes. I didn't know what she'd do with the information, but I had a feeling it wasn't going to end well for Bob. The fallout. When my wife was served, I got a call from one of her coworkers. She said my wife had burst into tears in the middle of the office, shouting about how unfair this was. I didn't answer the dozen calls she made to my phone afterward. As for Bob, the fallout came swiftly and brutally. His wife didn't just leave him, she scorched the earth. She drained their joint accounts, took the kids, and filed for divorce the next day. When her father found out what Bob had done, he fired him on the spot. And since their house was owned by her parents, Bob found himself evicted within a week. But it didn't stop there. Bob showed up at his former home, begging his wife to take him back. Her brother was there, and the confrontation quickly turned physical. By the time it was over, Bob was sporting a broken nose and a restraining order. Eventually, he left the state entirely. The man who once had everything, a family, a high-paying job, a beautiful home, was reduced to nothing. The pleas and the therapy sessions. Meanwhile, my wife was in full damage control mode. She begged me to reconsider, claiming she'd made a mistake and wanted to fix things for the sake of the kids. She even suggested couples therapy. I agreed, but not because I thought we could work things out. I went to those therapy sessions for one reason, to let her know exactly how I felt. I laid it all out in excruciating detail. How disgusted I was, how she destroyed everything we'd built, and how there was no path to reconciliation. Each session ended the same way, with her crying uncontrollably, barely able to look me in the eye. Eventually, she canceled the sessions. I think she finally realized there was no saving our marriage. Protecting the kids. Throughout the divorce process, I kept one thing at the forefront of my mind: my kids. They didn't need to know the details of what their mom had done, and I wasn't about to drag them into the mess. I never badmouthed her in front of them, and I made sure our custody arrangement was as smooth as possible. To this day, they don't know the full story. I still have Ron's report tucked away in a safe place, just in case they ever ask. But for now, they're happy and thriving, and that's all that matters. Rebuilding my life. A few years after the divorce was finalized, I remarried. My new wife is everything my ex wasn't: kind, supportive, and fiercely loyal. Together, we've built a life filled with trust and laughter. The kids adore her, and for the first time in years, I feel like I can truly breathe again. As for my ex-wife, I hear she's doing okay. She's still single, as far as I know, and we only talk when it's absolutely necessary. I don't feel hatred toward her anymore. What I feel is nothing. Justice served. Looking back, I don't regret how I handled things. My ex-wife and Bob made their choices, and they paid the price. Some might say I went too far, but I believe in letting karma do its job, with a little push, of course. They say the best revenge is living well, and I couldn't agree more. But let's be honest, sometimes helping karma along the way makes it that much sweeter. Thank you for joining us on the Payback Vault. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more epic revenge stories. And remember, sometimes karma just needs a little nudge.